I really took the decades prior to this for granted. But then as you get older, you start to see things. You start to hear older people talk about what it used to be like. And you're like, why are they so stuck on the past? And I know why. It's because the present usually sucks. If you're a child of the 80s, our decade is remembered by pop culture. If you're a 90s baby, you're gonna remember the Power Rangers, the daytime talk shows. If you're somebody born into the 2000s, iPhones, social media, technology. What stands out about this decade? A pandemic? Welcome back to the channel. This is Can I Be Ernest? For those of you who are new to the channel, just a little disclaimer. This channel is primarily about mocking life, mocking humans, myself included. I wrote a book titled Can I Be Ernest 6 years ago. Self-deprecating book, mocking my life. So anything that I find worth commentating on, you might get a little tongue-in-cheek from time to time. I do like making fun of life because a lot of us take this stuff way too seriously. And it's a lot of foolery going on and it needs to be talked about. Just want to throw it out there so you can get a sense of my personality and my humor. So you see the title. How will the 2020s be remembered? So for starters, I am an 80s baby. And by the way, if you were born in like 1989, you're not an 80s baby. You turned a year in 90. Like, we got to cut that out. But that's what's having grown up in the 80s. I got the opportunity to pretty much see how things used to be for all the old heads who may tune in. You know, the 80s had sprinkles of the 70s in there. So we kind of grew up with the same moral compass and disciplines as those of you born in the 60s and 70s. Of course, in the 80s, things started to change just a little bit as far as pop culture and society is concerned. But in the 80s, you know, we had our Saturday morning cartoons, our WWF wrestling. We would get reminded of what the 60s were like with all the old sitcoms that would come on. You know, Leave It to Beaver and, I don't know, The Brady Bunch, Bewitched, I Love Lucy. So we had sprinkles of the previous decades in my decade. And then in the 90s, of course, it got a little more colorful. Sitcoms were still around. Cartoons were still around for children. But things got a little hip, a little cool with just society as a whole. Again, fashion, hip hop took off, rock, alternative rock. Pop culture was different in the 90s in a good way. And I'm thankful for both experiences. We get into the 2000s and I have a video on here where I document missing the early 2000s. You can find the link in the description. But the 2000s or the early part, very slept on era, very slept on time. But we know what happened then. Technology took off, you know, the iPod, the iPad, the iPhone, social media. We start off with, you know, MySpace and Facebook. Of course, we had like AOL and AIM and stuff like that in the 90s. But in the 2000s, that's when everything took off. 2010s, to be honest with you, the 2010s aren't as memorable to me. A lot of people say things started to change in 2020. Personally, I felt the shift in 2012. I think that's when society just started to, I don't know, you could just feel it. You can feel it. But the 2010s, it was just more loosey-goosey. Felt weird. But the 2020s, that's when things got a little tricky. Think about it. We start the decade off with a pandemic, which had society, the world at that, in a chokehold. Some people thrived during the pandemic. Others were seeking therapists. They couldn't take it. Not socially interacting drove a lot of people crazy. Not me, but this is not about me. But 2020 starts off like that. And it's a lot of unrest in this decade. A lot of disclosures with celebrities. We get disclosure with, you know, UFOs. But a lot of unrest. Which leads me to ask, how will you remember this decade? What are some of the positives about the 2020s? As we approach 2025, I don't even know if we're in the right year. I just don't know anymore. There's been so many revelations in this decade. Social media has given life to additional sources, some additional news sources, whether they're credible or not, but it gives us more to where we now know of certain things that, were taboo back in the days. We didn't know about how bad cereal and certain foods were, processed foods. We didn't know about this stuff in the 80s. Some of us, who were maybe intellectually sound knew about it, but Saturday mornings was synonymous with eating cereal. Now it's hard to even catch me in the cereal aisle because of all the information we're fed about health and everything else. But the 2020s is it's like a blur, if you ask me. And again, if you can think of any positives, please enlighten me in the comments. But it feels like a blur. I mean, the movies are bad. The music, don't get me started. Think about movies over the past 10 years. I mean, everything is CGI. Now, for all my movie buffs, yeah, CGI existed for decades. It's nothing new. But now that we have 4K capability and HD and all this stuff, you basically see everything. So cinema kind of loses its feel. Imagine watching a movie like Avatar or Black Panther where you see like the computer in the background, like you can see the digital background. That's kind of cheesy to me. That's worse than 80s movies cheese. Think about music. Songs are about 2 minutes long now. 2 minutes. I grew up in a time where you might get a 7-8 minute track. You young people can't listen to 8-minute songs right now. You'll lose your mind. You'll be at your therapist every day. But we were privileged to get an 8-9 minute song sometime if it was like an extended version. Television, okay, so there's more original content on streaming services, Netflix, Hulu. I'll give you guys that for the 2020s. Better content to watch as far as series are concerned. But overall, the fashion, look at the fashion. You can't go anywhere without seeing somebody in a pair of PJs and Crocs. You go to the grocery store, you're going to see it. You go to church, you're going to see it. You might even see it at work, depending on where you work. Fashion, as we all know, kind of recycles every 5-10 years. So things that are trendy now were out in the 90s. So again, baggy clothes are in. That's my era. There's really no originality in the 2020s. I can't think of anything original aside from people just doing as they please. It's a free-for-all, the 2020s. It's pretty much like no rules. Anything goes. And I used to always wonder why, when I was younger, why old people would always shit on the decade that we were in. So if we were in the 90s and you were in your 30s in the 90s or 40s, you hated the 90s. You wanted to go back to the 60s. And I never understood that until I became older. Like, this decade sucks. So you get 2-minute songs. All the movies are remakes of 80s and 90s. It's all CGI. People wear what they want. There's really no more rules. If I could reverse time, I'd stop at like 2000 and then reset it to like, 0 or something. But there's nothing that stands out in the positive light, in my opinion. I'm sure plenty of people have thrived in the 2020s. Truthfully, social media has enabled a lot of young people to blossom financially, create opportunities for themselves, multiple sources of income. We didn't have that in the 70s, 80s, 90s. We didn't have that. So besides being able to capitalize on making income on social media platforms, I just don't know what stands out. It seems like this decade is stuck. Again, as a child of the 80s, whether it was cheesy or not, we had a whole lot of movies, sitcoms, pop culture was alive, MTV, whatever you can think of, action figures. It was an explosion of everything in the 80s. Fashion, whether you thought it was cheesy or not, it didn't matter. It was unique for its time period. It was just a different time. But it just seems like the 2000s those who are growing up, of course, you guys are going to find a lot of perks about living in the 2000s. But for those of us who witnessed the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, like the 2020s are trash. I'm really trying to think about this in real time. Like, I'm really trying to think about the good of this decade. There's really nothing. But it's just something I wanted to reflect on because everybody's going to be gearing up for the new year in a few months. And it's like, gosh, we're halfway through this shit. And it's been trash. You know, I don't know how I would fare right now being a teenager in 2024. All you know are cell phones and downloading music and streaming movies. Like, there's really nothing else. What's the interaction with girls if you're a guy watching? What's the interaction with guys if you're a girl watching? You know, do you have any stories? Like, I got stories from my childhood that I still remember that I don't think would have existed had I been born this era. You know, there's movies I still go back to from the 80s and 90s because it puts me in a better mood. You can't ask me to watch a movie that came out in 2022, you know, unless it was like a banger. Like, anything new with new people, I hate to crap on young people, but it's like, yo, it's nothing. You guys are not feeding my appetite. So it's just tough, man. But I just wanted to kind of like break down the decades and share my opinions and my feelings on how this decade will be remembered. And I can't honestly think of anything that makes the 2020s memorable in a good way. I'm a deep thinker, and I'm somebody who really wants to find the positives, find the pros. There's a million cons I could list about the 2020s. I mean, a million, literally. But there's got to be about 5 pros. So feel free to let me know. It could be something I'm missing, but it just really feels like blah. And lastly, I do appreciate all the recent new subscribers. Can I be Ernest? Is a slow build, slow grind. I'm in no rush. Just looking to, you know, connect with alike minds who like deep, thought-provoking topics and can give me their point of view.